Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for ETR's latest macro survey findings webinar. As a reminder, each survey we conduct is accompanied by a comprehensive data findings report, and the entire survey and data visualization dashboards are currently available on the ETR platform. In addition, the ETR Insights team is continually hosting qualitative discussions with our ITDM community to provide end-user feedback and analysis around the enterprise technology trends that our data uncovers. Each interview is published with a full transcript, video replay, and executive summary, all of which feed our comprehensive and searchable ETR Insights library, also available on the platform. ETR also has its own expert network populated with the ITDM decision makers in our community, which is quickly becoming a preferred provider for our savvy, tech-focused clients. Lastly, ETR rolled out our new market array product this year, which is a 100% data-backed alternative to opinion-based research for product granularity markets that is supported wholly by end-user evaluation and feedback. As always, you can reach out to us at service@etr.ai to request any of our proprietary research or to get started on your own custom surveys and research projects. Now on to the macro findings. ETR's macro survey consistently tracks and updates core macro trends like budget growth, spending priorities, and organizational trends, but also quickly iterates the topics based on shifting priorities, technology trends, and most importantly, client feedback. As an example, this July 2024 macro survey iteration adds in pricing increasing trackers across 4 core areas of tech spending. It will also highlight a few select findings from our recent State of Gen AI survey. If you would like to see the full data findings from the Gen AI report, please reach out to our service team. And as always, please keep the communication coming. We love to hear your feedback and ideas. With that out of the way, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Eric Bradley, and I am joined today by my ETR research analyst colleagues, Dr. Darren Brabham, Jake Fabrizio, and Doug Brule, who will be joining me in the analysis on this call. This macro survey period opened up in the first week of June and closed just 5 short days ago. This survey captured participation from more than 1,750 IT decision makers in our community, with nearly 25% hailing from Global 2000 organizations. 75% of the respondents held C-suite or director-level titles, and we continually to thoughtfully organize our IT respondent community to represent a diverse cross-section of industry verticals. Although the high-budget sectors of IT telco, services consulting, and financials insurance combine for roughly half of the respondents and are purposefully curated to capture large swaths of enterprise IT dollars. Lastly, the survey respondent breakdown by enterprise size is represented by roughly 60% large enterprises and 40% mid to small enterprises. And with the final survey tally completed, we review the full year 2024 budget growth estimate and see that this quarter the number came in at a 3.7% annual increase, higher than the previously reported expectations of 3.4% captured by survey takers back in April, but still below initial 2024 expectations of 4.3% annual growth recorded during the January survey period. That upward directionality is also expressed in our initial fourth quarter budget estimate of 3%, which is sequentially higher than Q2 and Q3 at 2.2 and 2.6% respectively. Here we take a closer look at which responded subsamples in our survey have the most optimistic and pessimistic outlooks for IT spending. Focusing in on total 2024 estimates compared to total 2023 IT spend, we see that despite the aggregate revision lower in spending estimates since the beginning of the year, some responded subsamples are well above the current mean of 3.7%. Both mid-size and small organizations have revised estimates lower since January, but still remain above the mean at approximately 4.6% annual growth. Overall, since the January polling window, the downward revision in full-year IT spending growth is less prevalent among large enterprises at negative 0.5 percentage points, while small organizations at negative 1.8 percentage points indicate a much larger decline. A notable divergence is seen when parsing the data by job title. While C-suite respondents have tempered their initial year start estimates, VP director level respondents have lowered their revised spending projections to a greater degree. Meanwhile, practitioner level estimates have rebounded considerably versus the weaker data captured 3 months ago. Lastly, while all regional subsamples now estimate slower growth than the January estimates, APAC, EMEA, and North American respondents have revised their budget growth projections above the prior survey levels. And with that, we hand the mic off to the most recent addition to the ETR research team, a U.S. veteran, an accomplished equity analyst most recently with JP Morgan, and an all-around intelligent and wonderful human, Mr. Doug Bruhl. Welcome to the team, Doug, and please continue with the data findings from this period.
In our July survey, nearly 2/3 of respondents expect an increased IT budget in the third quarter compared with 1 year prior. The top priorities for spending growth are the acceleration of new projects, followed closely by expanding cloud resources within their organizations. Significantly less of a priority is the adoption of new vendors at 6% of IT decision makers. Feature expansion within existing vendors was a more popular choice at 13%, while additional user and business unit growth within existing vendors came in at 8%. Turning to how organizations plan to decrease IT spend, staff reductions and delaying or halting new projects remain the top 2 ways to remain within adjusted budgets. Consolidation of redundant vendors saw the greatest percentage increase versus last quarter, while reduction of consulting and outsourcing declined the most as a method to remain within financial constraints. We also note that 20% of survey respondents actually plan to reduce overall spending in Q3 of this year compared to the third quarter of last year. I will now turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Darren Brabham, to discuss new projects and IT pricing increases.
Thanks, Doug. We turn now to a series of slides that show to what extent vendors have raised or lowered prices over the past 6 months when compared to 7 to 12 months ago. We track these data in 4 areas of tech spending. First, we'll look at cloud spending, and this is infrastructure as a service and platform as a service spending in cloud to be exact. On average, respondents say pricing from their cloud vendors has increased 2.5% over the past 6 months compared to the 6 months prior. More than half, or 54%, say that vendors have raised pricing to some extent, and 16% say that these prices have increased 6% or more. About a quarter say pricing has remained flat, and another 11% say vendors have actually lowered IaaS and PaaS cloud pricing. Compared to the other areas of tech spending we'll examine in the next few slides, though, this particular area, cloud, has seen the smallest average change in pricing in the past 6 months. Now let's turn to pricing changes for hardware. Here, data remain consistent from a quarter ago. Hardware pricing has increased an average of 2.9% in the past 6 months. More than half of respondents, or 57%, report some kind of pricing increase in hardware, and 21% say the increase has been 6% or greater. Almost a fifth say pricing has remained flat in hardware, and 13% actually report lower prices. The average change in price for hardware is higher than cloud, but it's lower than outsourced services and software. Now to outsourced services, and to note we simply called this services back in the April 2024 polling period, but we've added more clarity going forward. Respondents say average price increases are at 3.1% in the past 6 months. More than half, 55%, say pricing is growing to some extent in outsourced services, with 22% citing price increases of 6% or more. A fifth of respondents say their outsourced services pricing is flat, and 10% say prices have come down to some extent. Outsourced services are showing the second highest pricing changes. It's ahead of cloud and hardware, but they trail software. Compared to the April 2024 polling window, however, outsourced services are showing the sharpest decline in pricing increases compared to other areas. And that brings us to the final tech area for which we track pricing changes, software. This includes both on-premises and SaaS software. A 3.6% increase in software pricing is the average change in the past 6 months compared to 7 to 12 months ago. Almost two-thirds of respondents say software pricing has risen to some extent, with a quarter saying prices have grown at least 6%. Just 16% say pricing is flat in this area, and only 10% say prices have come down at all. Of the areas that we track, this area of tech is showing the largest average changes in pricing. Let's turn now to our principal research analyst, Jake Fabrizio, to talk tech priorities and generative AI. Jake?
Thank you, Darren. In the next few slides, we'll take a look at the priority areas where some of these excess vendor dollars may be flowing over the next 12 months. We'll kick it off with priorities within enterprise applications. In this area, customer relationship management saw the highest average priority rating, with nearly half of respondents indicating the highest marks of 4 or 5. CRM is followed closely by financial management, and then by enterprise resource planning and business spend management, respectively. Marketing automation systems and enterprise content management saw materially lower priority ratings than other focus areas within the sector. We'll next take a look at priorities within database and data warehousing. Focus areas here fall in a much tighter line, with the top 4 average ratings between 3.1 and 3.4. In the lead is data lakes and data warehouses for business intelligence and reporting, with nearly half of respondents indicating a 4 or 5 priority rating on the area. In tow, the next highest priorities are data lakes and warehouses for advanced analytics and data science, followed by then data modeling or data quality improvements, and finally migration to the cloud. What's interesting here is that migration to the cloud actually had the highest proportion of high rating 5, 21% of the sample. However, cloud migration also had a relatively high proportion of low 1 ratings, and therefore only takes the 4th spot in this analysis. Meanwhile, relational databases round out the top 5 priority rankings, while graph or retrieval augmented generation databases and NoSQL databases take the bottom 2 spots. Moving on, generative AI remains the hot topic du jour, and ETR has got you covered with the latest data on the space. Here's a small 2-slide taste of data from our State of Generative AI report that we will be releasing in the coming weeks. By this point, 84% of respondents have indicated that they have evaluated generative AI use cases in the enterprise. So today we'll jump right into production of use cases. Of those that have evaluated, only 25% indicated that no use cases are being used in production, which means that 3/4 of those respondents are already leveraging this technology. This rate has quickly grown from 60% 12 months ago. In terms of top use cases, text and data summarization, along with writing copy, remain the 2 most cited at 29% and 25% respectively. Collaboration, a debut use case in the survey, also had a strong showing, coming in 3rd with 26% of respondents. Code generation and documentation and internal IT support and help desk round out the top 5 use cases that enterprises are already using in production for generative AI. This next model reflects a new line of questioning in our work. We polled respondents on their willingness to pay incremental costs to a vendor for new generative AI tools or features that are embedded into an existing product that they already use. Information security and productivity were the top 2 use cases here, garnering more than 18% of respondents to score a 5 on a scale of 1 to 5 of their willingness to pay. Across both of these areas, productivity and information security, nearly half of respondents ranked their willingness as either a 4 or a 5. The other listed use cases had similar average rankings, although chatbot, support, and search stood out, with similarly impressive high ratings. Meanwhile, IT asset management ranked the lowest. Stay tuned for the full State of Generative AI report coming after the Technology Spending Intention Survey reporting period. Reach out to your ETR service professional for how you can get your hands on it as soon as it's released. And with that, I'll pass the torch back over to my esteemed colleague, Eric Bradley.
Thank you, Jake. And up next are a few slides that originated directly from client requests. So please take that as a reminder to keep the lines of communication open with your service reps. Let us know what types of data and analysis you find valuable in future survey iterations. Please, we will listen. Okay, in this analysis, the ETR analytics team created a sliding scale to see how individual vendors within their respective sectors would be impacted by shifting IT budgets. The underlying basis is to see how vendor net scores correlate with survey respondents planning negative spend, flat spend, or positive spend, with this period's focus being 2024 Q3 spending patterns. In these slides, we further break down the analysis by sectors alphabetically in which we track the vendors in. Let's kick off with the semi-recently acquired Splunk, which showed the widest net score spread between those respondents with positive versus negative third quarter spend change. On the other end of the spectrum, Dynatrace showed very little divergence depending on respondent spending patterns, a little foreshadowing for a solid data set on the vendor that we will highlight 1 week from today in our full July 24 TSIS webinar. But I digress. Another name worth noting in this analysis is Elastic. Although much less severe than Splunk, the observability vendor still sees sensitivity to spending patterns here. And on a more positive note, respondents with positive IT spend change for Q3 were also much more positive on Snowflake spending plans within the database data warehousing sector, as compared to those with flat or negative IT spend change for Q3. Next, we switch to the information security and infrastructure software sectors. Standouts in InfoSec are numerous, with 11 vendors showing up in this analysis. With too many to choose from, we call out CrowdStrike, CyberArk, Qualys, and Splunk as the vendors that saw the largest disparity in net score between positive and negative IT spend profiles. As for the infrastructure software sector, there is only one headline, and that is Broadcom's most recent flagship acquisition of VMware, and more importantly, the aggressive pricing strategy being deployed towards VMware customers. In this analysis, we see that VMware saw the weakest spending intentions, with both the flat and negative IT spend change groups citing negative net scores. This analysis will also be carried over to the July 24 vendor reports for Nutanix and IBM, especially with Red Hat, next week. But again, I digress. Lastly, we see that IT consulting giants are also seeing the most sensitivity to spending changes, with both Deloitte and Accenture seeing the largest gap between positive and negative IT spend groups of any vendor in any sector. Wrapping up this analysis, we see that Deloitte shows up again in the outsourced IT sector. On the opposite end of the spectrum, both Microsoft Office and Microsoft Teams look strong among respondents increasing their 3Q spend. Lastly, both Citrix and Smartsheet within the productivity app sector indicate the largest range of net score variation between those respondents with positive and negative third quarter spend profiles. And with that, I'm going to slide it over to the ethereal modulations of Dr. Darren Brabham to bring us on home. Back to you, Dr. D.
And this concludes our Macro Views webinar. ETR has 3 flagship surveys we conduct multiple times a year: the Technology Spending Intention Survey, the Emerging Technology Survey, and the Macro Views Survey, all powered by our thoroughly vetted and constantly growing ETR community of IT decision makers. We have interactive data visualizations, reports, and webinar replays from these surveys on our site. ETR also has a growing body of qualitative research from our ETR Insights interview series. These one-on-one and panel interviews with IT decision makers help tell the stories behind the data, and a searchable transcript library and associated analyst-written summaries are accessible through the reports marketplace. We also do custom surveys and focus group panels and interviews for organizations seeking best-in-class bespoke research on enterprise IT topics. And lastly, don't forget, ETR has its own expert network service called ETR Connect, where you can conduct one-on-one calls with members from our IT decision maker community. Be on the lookout for sector and vendor-specific reports and the full TSIS findings webinar, where we discuss our vendor data sets of highest conviction. Following the TSIS webinar a week from today, all materials will be available on the ETR platform. Until next time, take care.